Salute, my Quickclassics friends. In Texan, that translates to howdy, y'all. Give a couple of shout outs today before we talk about the Roman Republic. One to my nephews, Wyatt and Reese. When Reese found out that his Uncle Judd had a YouTube channel, he was most elated, so hello, Reese. And also to my friend Erin Holmes, literary scholar extraordinaire. Appreciate her comments on Ovid and Virgil, and look forward to more of those thoughtful comments. All right, Roman Republic. The establishment of the Roman Republic took place in 509 BC, and this was after the rule of three Etruscan kings that had been elected by the Curiate Assembly. The patricians in the Senate and this Curiate Assembly were tired of the mechanism of the Roman Rex, the Roman king, and so they overthrew and demolished the office of Rex. Not exactly demolished, it was retained, sort of changed into a priesthood, the Rex Sacrorum. But the Senate took over. This was most definitely a coup, and that's why I say this is not an American Revolution style takeover, changing of the guard for the equitable liberties and rights of all Roman people. This was a political maneuver, a political coup, but they did it in as much as they thought that it would ensure the stability of the Roman state and also its longevity. But I have to emphasize, this was entirely a patrician-led event. The plebeians did not have a significant role in this, and actually would not have access to the Senate, direct access in terms of becoming an elected senator until the early 3rd century BC. That's a gradual process that takes a lot of blood and sweat and tears, and there are a number of offices that are gradually made available to them, such as consul and magistrate and tribune and praetor and so on and so forth. But if the establishment of the Republic, the Res Publica, was the defining maneuver in the 6th century BC, then in the 5th century BC, it was the creation of the 12 tables. Now, this occurred in 450 BC and was the codification of Roman law. Undoubtedly, most of these laws had existed in oral form or as understood social and cultural norms. This is simply the articulation, the codification, and writing down of the 12 tables, so-called because of the 12 sections of the law that dealt with aspects of Roman life and statecraft, ownership of property, etc., etc. And this would become the basis for Roman politics, not only during the Republic era, but also during, with modifications of course, during the Roman Empire. And a case could also be made for the fact that the Roman 12 tables became the basis for laws in the Byzantine Empire, which was actually the survival of the Eastern Roman Empire. There were alterations that were made in the 6th century AD under Justinian and Tribonian, and so this is a very long-lived set of laws. Should also be noted that by this time, Roman religion is thoroughly influenced by the Greeks. The Greeks had actually colonized a portion of southern Italy, and so there was regular contact between the Greek world and the Romans by this time, and as a result, the Roman gods began to become conflated with the Greek gods, and they took on more anthropomorphic properties. Be that as it may, much of Roman religion was still retained, and there was a complex system of priests and pontifical colleges and augurs and diviners and temples and public shrines and private shrines. Religion was a very important part of the Roman state during the Republic period, as evinced by the calendar that we have actually good records for. and all of the festivals to the gods that were held. In 350 BC, there's an important event in which the first plebeian dictator is elected. Now, I only bring this up because not only it's a big step for the plebeians, but also the term dictator, as we use it, means a despot or a tyrant. But in ancient Rome, a dictator was an honorable title. It was one given to a military commander who was temporarily given control of the city of Rome in order to protect it in a time of crisis. And when the crisis had passed, that title was to be given back. Hold that thought. In 287 BC, as I pointed out earlier, the plebeians finally gain access to the Senate in terms of being elected as equal senators. And in fact, some of the most famous senators in Roman history were plebeians. For instance, Cicero was a plebeian. Now, it's at this point that after a couple of centuries of defending what had become Rome against tribes like the Celts and the remnants of the Etruscans and some of the other tribes in Italy, Rome began to look outward and to try and expand. Well, competition often happens between nations on an economic level first, and that's exactly what happens between Rome and its southern neighbor, Carthage. Carthage was a Phoenician colony in North Africa, and they were making inroads into Roman territory, such as Sicily. Now, there was a lot of money to be made in the Western Mediterranean, and both sides are really making it hand over fist. So it's only natural that there's going to be some tension, and this erupts into a series of wars between the Carthaginians and the Romans, known as the Punic Wars. So from 264 BC to about 146 BC, there are three wars between the Carthaginians and the Romans, known as the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars takes its name from the dye that the Phoenicians take their name from, punis, which was a purple dye made from a shellfish used to dye royal robes. See, purple was the color of royalty in antiquity. So, as I said, there's a lot of money to be made, and the Carthaginians were certainly making their share, but they wanted to move into Roman territory, or at least territory that Rome had claimed. Now, you'll recognize some of the personalities in the Punic Wars, like Hamilcar Barca in the First War. But even if you've never heard of Hamilcar Barca, you've probably heard of Hannibal, who was famous in the later phases of the war, and Roman heroes like Scipio Africanus. Long story short, the Romans defeat the Carthaginians, and in doing so, they absorb the territory that the Carthaginians had heretofore controlled, which included North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. And so now Rome had consolidated the entire west of the Mediterranean sphere and looked towards the Hellenic East to begin to consolidate and absorb the Greek lands, which they would do over the next century or so. And so Rome is, even at this point, taking on the hues of empire. And when countries become imperial and expand, or if they simply just become larger, the tendency is for the government to become increasingly centralized and bureaucratized, and that's what we're seeing here. And there are power vacuums that are created by this that attract these megalomaniacal, narcissistic, power-hungry personalities, so that we see not emperors beginning to play more important roles, but oligarchs, if you will, in the form of triumvirates during the 2nd century and into the 1st century BC. Now, the first triumvirate was comprised of Pompey, Julius Caesar, and another name that you may not be familiar with, But that is what's his name? Crassus. Now, all of these guys were friends of one sort or another, particularly Julius Caesar and Pompey. And Pompey actually did quite a bit for consolidating the aforementioned Greek East. In fact, he sort of finishes off that in about 63 BC by absorbing the Levant in Egypt. And Caesar goes off on his Gallic campaigns, and while he's away, it's largely Pompey who's in control of Rome, and much to the chagrin of the Senate, I might add. But long story short, Pompey and Caesar have a falling out, and 49 BC, Caesar crosses the Rubicon with his army and defeats Pompey over the next few years. Caesar was one of these guys who had been given the title of dictator, but he refused to give it up because of the popularity he had gained. Now, again, much to the chagrin of the Senate. And you know the story here, if you've read your William Shakespeare, that there was a conspiracy that emerged in the Senate under the direction of Brutus and Cassius. And again, you all know the story. Caesar is assassinated in the Senate on the Ides of March. They stab him to death. Another triumvirate emerges in the form of Caesar's right-hand man, Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Caesar's heir, his nephew, grandnephew technically, Octavian. Now, there's no love lost between Mark Antony and Octavian to begin with. Mark Antony goes off to the east to dilly-dally with Cleopatra. Octavian is busy finishing his education, which includes military education, and Octavian and Antony end up clashing, and their armies clash in the east, culminating in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, in which Octavian's forces defeat those of Mark Antony. Lepidus, of course, is eventually stripped of his power too. Mark Antony is an interesting character for a number of reasons. Don't have time in this lecture to talk about it, but suffice to say, Octavian returns to Rome. He's hailed as the savior of everything Roman, the Roman state. The Senate gives him the title of Augustus, which means revered, and we have the period of the empire ushered in 31 BC. Well, click a like, subscribe to my channel if you like this, and we'll see you soon. Godspeed.